Hi, welcome to Determined to Fail. Today, we're answering a very simple question, which is, can you use 35-year-old photography lenses on a modern cinema camera? And if you can, is it even practical to use those in a real-world shoot scenario? Let's find out. Got another package. I actually don't know what this one is. I never used to understand in videos and stuff when people would talk about, oh, I got a package. I don't know what this one is. You ordered it. How can you not know what? I understand now. I get it. It's difficult to know sometimes. Yeah, this will be very fun to play around with. So this end goes into the camera. This end attaches my Pentax K lenses. Look on big sweaty films, boy. Do you know how expensive lenses are? Like, really expensive. I have 3 lenses for my camera, and together they're worth about $4,000 in Aussie Freedom Kangaroo Kombucha coins. I managed to get mine on sale, so they weren't quite that expensive, but it's still a lot of money. And the thing with lenses is their basic operation and value doesn't really degrade over time or become outdated the same way camera equipment does. So yes, autofocus and sharpness, things like that, is not going to be as good on older lenses, but the basic operation of funneling light into a camera sensor hasn't changed for like 100 years or something, a long time. Do you know how much these lenses cost me? They were free. I didn't pay for them. I got them without, there was no transaction. They're free, which is a lot cheaper. So these lenses belonged to my dad's photography camera. This is a Pentax P30, and I'm hoping to make a video about learning how to shoot photography on this camera in the future. So stick around for that, I guess, if you're interested. So we're gonna test both of these lenses out and find out if they even work. Spoilers, yes, they do. And then we're gonna use them to shoot a real project to find out, in the modern era that we live in, is it even possible to get decent results out of a 35-year-old lens? That's what we're doing. Please subscribe. This one is a 35 to 200 millimeter macro zoom lens. I believe this was a cheaper lens that came with the camera. It was like the kit lens. It's an f3.8, and it's really interesting. You extend the barrel forwards to zoom, which is not like any lens I've ever seen, and then you rotate the barrel like a focus ring. At 200mm, you then gain access to an extra macro focus mode, which is pretty cool. Like, macro is like when with the focus, that's called macro. It's definitely the most unique layout for a lens I think I've ever seen. It also has pretty numbers and colors on it, which I quite like. This one is a Carl Zeiss 28mm prime f2.8. This one is really nice, and apparently it was a lot more expensive back in the day, and a lot better quality. Zeiss is still a very well-regarded lens manufacturer, and they still make really good quality glass to this day. Because it's a prime lens, it's tiny. It has a 52mm thread size on the front. It feels really solid. It's just nice and tight, and yeah, it's great. I'm very excited to play with this one. Both of these lenses have a minimum aperture of f22, and they both came with these little UV filters on the front. At least I think these are UV filters. Hey Dad, is this a UV filter or is it something else?
Yeah, called the skylight filter.
Okay.
It's a UV filter plus skylight, which makes the blues bluer.
So it does affect the image color a little bit for the sky.
Slightly. It was marketed as a bit of a UV plus.
Yeah.
UV filter, particularly for outdoors and landscapes.
Huh. Thanks. If you want to replicate this experiment at home, you'll either need a family member that you can steal lenses from. Darling, no, you gotta stay there, otherwise the video doesn't work. Or you can find them for incredibly cheap prices on various second-hand places like Facebook Marketplace. I bought this one, which is yet another Pentax lens. I actually bought this just the other day. This is a 200mm prime. I got this from Cashies, mate. It was $75, which is probably more than I should have paid for it, given that it's a 200mm prime that I'll probably never use. But it looks nice, and now I have a larger lens collection. The other thing you'll need is some kind of lens adapter so that you can go from the Pentax mount to the Sony mount or whatever camera you're shooting on. I'm using this one from Earth. It was about $80, I think, including shipping. It's really great. It's definitely on the higher priced end of these kind of things. I'm gonna make a separate little bonus video as a detailed review of that if you want to do that, but it's great. If you're gonna get an adapter, just make sure you get the correct lens mount for your vintage lenses to whatever camera you're using. Make sure you get one that's decent so you're not going to damage your very expensive and irreplaceable gear with what is realistically a very cheap piece of gear. Do your research on that one. This is the very first clip that I recorded. This is using the 35-200. It was very bright on the day. All of these clips are just recorded at 1080p at 8-bit color, so nothing too fancy on the file format. I shot everything in S-Log3, and I've just put a Rec 709 conversion over the top of it. There's no color grading, there's no contrast of any kind on these clips, just so you can see the raw output from the camera. So right off the bat, especially on this lens, there's a lot of blooming, but it totally works. There was no compatibility issues. The camera just figured out that I was using a manual aperture lens and it all worked pretty well. Now, I didn't really nail the focus, but that's kind of beside the point. But when we compare to the same shot on the Sigma, you can see these two images really are very different. You can see the Pentax lens is way warmer and there's a lot more contrast in the Sigma image. And I should mention as well, all of these comparisons are shot with the exact same camera settings. All I did was take one lens off and put the other one on. So no white balance changes, no nothing, only difference is the lens. So you can see here, this really does highlight the huge difference between the two. Moving outdoors, this is the 28mm. This shot looks pretty great, actually. You can see again, the shadows are a little bit soft and kind of brighter than you'd expect. It's a bit less contrasty, and it seems like there's a little bit of a magenta shift on this one. I don't know if I'm just imagining that. I actually don't have a take on the Sigma from this angle to compare it to, but I do for this one. Looking pretty nice. Again, there's a little bit of a warm magenta shift there, and the shadows are a little bit, they just seem creamier. It's not quite as pronounced as the other lens, but you can see when I compare to the Sigma, the shadows are much, much more contrasty and richer on the Sigma. But I kind of like this look. Those creamy kind of magenta shadows is something that I really like in color grading anyway, and a lot of the time I try and fake that look. So it's kind of cool to just have that baked into the lens. It's also really helpful to see these side by side and really see what the differences are. This is the same location on the 35-200, just a slightly different shot. I'm zoomed in a little bit more. Again, much warmer and much softer. It's very stylized, but it is a pretty cool look. Depending on the project, you could definitely shoot with this and lean into that sort of dreamy look. This is the same shot with my exposure adjusted a little bit down. And this is zoomed all the way in at 200, which is actually 300 full frame equivalent on the FX30. There's also some very interesting shapes with the bokeh. Almost seems to be this sort of star pattern. I don't quite know how to describe it. I think this is pretty much the best that I could do with focus, and it is still very soft, especially in the areas around my face there. Very much an imperfect image. It's not what you would want for corporate photography, but it's cool and it's very fun to play around with. You can see there's some pretty significant focus breathing, which, you know, if you're not about that, again, compared to the Sigma, way warmer, way creamier. It looks like I've done a full like vintage dream sequence grade over this, even though it is exactly the same camera settings. And then just for fun, I did a shot here really close in on the Canon camera that I was using to film B-roll. You can also see up near the Canon logo, there's a lot of blooming happening, but there's also some chromatic aberration as well, that kind of teal sort of look on the outside. Again, I think it looks kind of cool. You just have to keep in mind that that's the look that you're going to end up with and make sure you're using it as a creative choice. But I think it could work. And here's a version with a bit of a grade over the top just to bring those shadows down and correct the white balance a little bit. Now that I know these lenses work, it's time to actually make something with them. Obviously, there are going to be some limitations when using these type of lenses. Firstly, these are both fully manual. So no Sony autofocus here. We're going to be pulling focus by hand. This also means manual aperture. So we'll have to use the aperture ring to change that. We can't do that through the camera. The aperture ring on the zoom lens doesn't really seem to work. I think it's broken somehow. Not sure how that happened. It just seems to be stuck wide open, which if it was going to be stuck anywhere, wide open is the most helpful place for that to be. So that limits the usability of this lens a little bit, but I'm most likely going to be using an ND filter with it anyway, so it's not too much of a big deal. I'd rather it be stuck wide open than stopped all the way down, in which case the lens is pretty much useless in all but the brightest of outdoor situations. Okay, so I did lie to you just a little bit. Oh no, it's nerdy time. These lenses do actually have an automatic aperture mode. If you turn the aperture ring to where it says A, I believe the P30 can talk to the lens when it's in automatic mode, and it can set the aperture based on the inbuilt light meter. However, that is not going to talk to a modern camera because the electronic contacts are different and it's just not the same system. And even if it did work, the lens adapter doesn't have any kind of electronic pass-through. So technically, they're not strictly speaking manual aperture only, but for the purpose of this video, they are, so it's fine. I am interested to see if this system works with the P30 though when we get into some film photography, but that's for another video. Stop asking me these questions. Be patient. The biggest limitation we're going to face is image quality. Even the most pristine, beautifully restored and looked after vintage lens is going to be no match to modern glass when it comes to sharpness and things like that. But that's not really the point. That's not why you use these old lenses. And for video applications where we're probably going to be putting some film grain and some film emulation effects over the top of it anyway, it really doesn't matter. And I've also seen a lot of people actually adding a slight blur to their footage because modern lenses are so sharp that it looks a little bit unnatural. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. And if it is really noticeable, that's kind of the character and the uniqueness that we're going for anyway. That said, there is a number of things that can go wrong with any lens that's been sitting in storage for 35 years. Luckily, my dad looked after these lenses really well. He actually custom made a camera box to store them in, and they've been in there well protected. So neither of them have any major scratches or damage to the glass elements, at least that I can see. They were both a bit cloudy when I got them out of the box, but I just gave them a good wipe down and a clean and they've come up really good. Unfortunately, though, the zoom lens does have a little bit of fungus growing inside it. You can see if you look really closely, which I believe is a pretty common thing for older lenses like this. So that's definitely going to affect the image quality a little bit. Not so on the Prime. This one is totally clear. Definitely no clouding or anything growing on the inside, which is great. It's a shame because I can't really do anything about it. It's inside the lens and short of taking it apart, which I don't know how to do. I'm not sure if there's any way really to clean it. I don't know how much of this has to do with the fact that it's just the cheaper lens, and I guess a lower quality product in the beginning is not going to age as well, and this is kind of an ongoing theme with this one. But the Prime, fantastic. Super clean, no issues there. The last thing we need to talk about is sensor cropping. So these lenses were designed to project an image onto 35mm film inside the Pentax camera. Film, it turns out, is the same size as a full-frame digital sensor, which is very handy when it comes to adapting these things to modern hardware. However, I'm shooting on the FX30, which is a crop sensor camera. It's an APS-C-sized sensor. So we are going to get the same crop factor with these lenses as if we were using full-frame lenses on the Sony. It's a 1.5 times crop, so that means the 28mm becomes about a 42mm lens. And the 35 becomes, let me look at my notes to remember the maths, the 35 becomes a 52 to 300mm. So everything gets quite a bit tighter. I would really like to see what this looks like being able to see the whole image, but until I buy or borrow a full-frame Sony camera, that's gonna have to wait. Hey guys, quick edit. I bought an FX3, which is pretty cool. It was very expensive. This is what the 28mm looks like on a full-frame camera. There'll be a video about the FX3 coming soon. my bank account is a lot smaller now. For our final test, I'm also going to be shooting handheld and using Sony's active image stabilization, which crops in a little bit further. So really, this is going to end up more like a 50mm by the time we account for the IBIS cropping and also the lens cropping onto the smaller sensor. Hello, you join me here on the floor. So the plan today is we're gonna use these vintage lenses for an actual video project, which is really exciting. So basically I'm catching up with a friend and filming a project for her, and then afterwards she's gonna stick around and we're gonna film maybe some dancing or some freestyle so that we can test out the lenses on an actual project that's not just me in my garden. I think I'm gonna use the 28mm. Also, welcome to my brand new camera bag for my Sony. It's much heavier now. It's a really good quality lens, and this is the one that I really wanna test out. But I don't have an ND filter for it, and I think we're gonna be shooting outside, and I really wanna get that background separation. So we could use the other one, even though it is blurry and very bloomy and it's got some imperfections in it. At least it's a 67mm thread size, which means I can use my backup ND filter on this one. If we really get stuck, we could pivot and change plan, and I have this anamorphic lens, which I'm also planning to make a video on. So maybe we'll just end up shooting anamorphic instead. The other problem with this one, using it handheld, is because the zoom works this way, I just feel like I'm gonna be holding the camera and I'm just gonna like accidentally be zooming. But either way, it's gonna be fun. So I just need to figure out how to fit 3 extra lenses into my bag that's completely full already. And also the adapter, that's important. Definitely need to bring this up. And I need to make sure I bring everything else that's normally in here because I'm gonna be filming a project with Annalise beforehand, which I need to have all the gear for. And then we're gonna shoot the vintage lens thing afterwards. So, all right, I think that should be everything. So I've got the lens adapter in here. The 28mm is just underneath there, which should be nice and protected. And then in this bag, I've got the anamorphic and telephoto down the bottom there. Random lens hoods, this microphone will go in there as well. I've also got the gimbal, and then I just need to remember to bring the lights as well, because the room that we're shooting in first is gonna be, I think, a little bit dark. So I wanna just make sure I bring the lights so that we can fill it with some light if we need to. And I also need power cables for that, so I need to bring the cables back. It's gonna be a lot to carry. If this isn't the most Star Wars clone trooper backpack looking thing you've ever seen in your life, I don't know what is. Until you've done video work where you haven't been able to park like 3 meters from where you need to be, you don't understand how helpful it is to be able to carry everything you need in one trip. Just one trip. It's so helpful. I spend way too much of my mental energy when I'm packing thinking about how I can carry everything with me in one trip. It is so helpful. One day I'll buy a trolley and then I can just put all the gear on that and take that. But until then, it's all about that one trip packing, am I right? Also, my phone is magnetized to my car. How cool is that? Come with me. Oh wow, we get to drive to Sydney again. I've never done that before. I sure am not getting tired of the 1.5 to 2 hour drive that it takes me to get to Sydney. Oh boy. Not that I'm gonna be filming things when I'm actually driving on the roads though, because that would be irresponsible and dangerous and cringe and dangerous and cringe. I have arrived. I did manage to find a park, which was nice, because often it can be very difficult to park here. However, I did realize on the drive that I forgot to bring a speaker, so I don't know how we're going to do music for the freestyle. But, you know, I'm sure we'll come up with a very clever creative solution. All right, Anna's video is done. We had a great time. That went really well. We were just filming in a studio. So now we're gonna drive to Glebe because we think that will work as a filming location. She's from Queensland and I'm from the Highlands, so neither of us know Sydney very well, but we think it's gonna work. Camera is rigged out in the most unnecessary way possible. We have a little lens down here. Got the Shinobi monitor on, which should be good. I've strapped it in. Need to keep my son safe. Off we go.
Do I go? Hi, my name's Annalise Cunnington and I'm a dancer, performer and choreographer based in Sydney.
And we filmed a video for you earlier and then you were like, hey, can you film? And I was like, I'd love to. Also, I have an idea. Can we film something else as well?
It involves stairs.
It involves stairs, apparently. Yay.
Yay!
The original plan for this shoot was to try and catch the afternoon sun and do a bunch of those sort of golden hour shots. Driving over there, the sunset was gorgeous. It was a beautiful sunset, but by the time we actually found a park and got set up and everything, we definitely missed it. So there's a couple of shots here just in twilight with the sun going down. So we shot for about 5 minutes, and at the end of that time, the sun was basically gone. So it was time to pivot a little bit. Focusing was a bit of a challenge, but I had the Shinobi on top of the camera, which really helped. I wouldn't really like to do this without a monitor, especially when it's getting dark, because it just makes everything more difficult to see when there's less contrast. But I got a few really nice shots here. All of these images were shot at 4K in 8-bit color. I don't know why I shot 8-bit. I should have just shot 10-bit for this, but I think I just forgot. Pretty much everything is with the aperture wide open at 2.8 to get as much light in as possible. And I've done no color grading to any of these, just a conversion from S-Log3 into Rec 709. This was a very challenging situation to be using this lens in because it was low light, not on a full frame camera. It was all handheld. It was very, very challenging, but pretty fun. This shot here with the street light is a really good example of this really lovely bloom. It's not over the top, and it definitely doesn't color the image quite as much as the other lens did, but it gives a really nice bloom and a nice dreamy look to the image without being too overbearing. It almost looks like I've got a pro mist filter on here or something. I really liked this shot with the windows in the background. I thought that was pretty cool. You can also see this double lens flare coming off that street light. This was pretty much our only well-lit scene that we managed to shoot. We found these stairs with LED strips under them. Again, we've got a little bit of bloom from the lights. That sort of mist filter look is quite popular at the moment, so I definitely don't think that's going to be an issue if you were trying to use this lens for a professional production. As long as you have a monitor and time to properly set your focus, I think it worked out totally fine. I really liked this shot. We spent lots of time playing around on these stairs. A little bit of a red sort of chromatic aberration you can see on her fingers there. This shot is a really good example. You can see that red line just on the highlight there where that light is. It looks like I've added a halation effect or something in post, but this is all just straight in the camera. Again, there's a really nice subtle bloom and flaring on the car headlights as they go by. I feel like this lens is a really good middle ground because the image quality is really nice. It gets pretty decently sharp given what it is and how old it is, but it has a few imperfections that you can kind of play with and bring out if you like that, but it's not going to ruin your image or be really, really stylistic like the other lens is. I also noticed in a few shots like this one, there is a pretty intense wobble going on with the IBIS. I actually think this was my fault though, because I didn't know that when you're using a manual lens on your camera, you're supposed to set the focal length in the IBIS settings. I didn't know how to do that. So if you own a Sony and you're using a manual lens or a vintage lens, just go into settings. You can tell the camera what focal length the lens is, and that will calibrate your IBIS correctly so that you don't get a lot of this jello shaking effect. So that's really good to know the next time I do this. And then just to give you an idea, this is the grade I went with for the final project. I went pretty heavy with the film grain and the kind of film emulation effects because I wanted to go for that more vintage look, and it also helped to hide some of the noise in the shadows because even though the FX30 is really good in low light, it's not perfect, and I definitely wanted to try and hide some of that behind some film grain. I think it looked really great, and with the degree that I manipulated the image for the final film, I really don't think anyone would be able to tell unless you really know filmmaking and you're pausing the image and pixel peeping and having a really close look. I really don't think you'd be able to tell. Here's a few more example shots with the Rec 709 conversion and then with the grade that I ended up going with for the film. So, is it practical to use free or cheap vintage photography lenses on a modern cinema camera and get a decent image out of it? I don't know. I'm gonna leave the answer up to you. I'll leave the footage here. You can go watch the full video that I made with Anna. I'll link that below. The whole thing was shot in 4K, so hopefully you can get a decent idea of what the image quality is doing, and I'll leave it up to you. Something like this is never going to be a practical workhorse for all scenarios. If you're gonna be shooting something on this and you're doing it as a professional shoot or a client's video or a corporate video, you're gonna have to pick your scenarios a little bit. There's no autofocus, there's no super sharpness. You can't really use them for like product photography or anything like that because they're just not sharp enough. But if what you're doing is video, if you wanna go for that more vintage film emulation look, I think they work great. And if you can deal with the lack of stabilization and the lack of autofocus, they're pretty much just cinema lenses, but with a little more character, which I think is really cool. As for whether the image quality holds up, that's up for you to decide. Well, there you go. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed getting to play with these lenses, and quite apart from the fact that we got a really good looking image out of what was pretty much a free lens, apart from having to buy a cheap adapter, it was just great to be able to use something that belonged to my dad that he used many years ago that I'm now finding new uses for with modern camera hardware, which is just awesome. If you're interested in doing this experiment yourself, I super recommend it. Go have a talk to your family members, see if anyone owns some Pentax lenses, or I know there's lots of vintage Sony and Canon lenses and all sorts of different things. These affordable lens adapters kind of open up a whole world of new glass that we can use, which is really exciting. Go follow Anna. I'll leave a link to her Instagram below and to all of the things, and I'll link to the film that we made. And a big thanks to Heath Studios. I don't know if Chester's here somewhere. Yeah, he's here, for letting me film in their very nice Warwick set. I wanted to film this video today, and instead of coming home, I just filmed it here, which is pretty cool. They keep it so clean that they sweep it while you're using it, which is just, I mean, that's service, really. All right, thank you for watching, and I'm gonna go probably buy more old lenses now. Bye.